Deep in a forest in another world, a beautiful elf woman was in the midst of a hunt. With a focused expression, she drew her bow, aiming an arrow at a deer-like creature with large antlers that grazed nearby. Just as she prepared to release the arrow, a black, swirling vortex suddenly opened beneath her feet. Startled, she lost her footing and fell straight through the portal, disappearing from the forest floor. She tumbled through a dark, streaked void, reaching out her hand in desperation as she fell away from her home world. Meanwhile, in a modern city setting, a young man named Akio Urabe was struggling through his own daily battles. A 24-year-old programmer, Akio looked utterly exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes as he sighed about finally being able to go home. He had been working all night for 3 days in a row, a symptom of his inability to refuse requests from others. Akio possessed a passive nature that made it difficult for him to say no. He often found himself accepting extra work or cleaning duties when asked by female coworkers, even while other colleagues firmly declined similar requests because they were busy. He was highly sensitive to his surroundings, easily influenced by the stress of others, and would become nervous even just overhearing a supervisor shouting on the phone about a sick employee. Walking home alone along a riverbank, Akio slumped in his suit, lamenting how hard life was and thinking that things would be easier if he had a more detached personality. Suddenly, a dark portal opened in the sky above the river. The elf woman plummeted from the vortex, falling straight toward the water. Akio watched in shock as a massive splash erupted from the surface, realizing instantly that someone was drowning. Looking around the empty riverbank, Akio realized he was the only one there who could help. He was gripped by fear as he recalled a painful and scary memory from his childhood, where he had nearly drowned. Despite the trauma, he resolved that he had to go, even if he was alone. He threw his jacket and briefcase onto the grass and sprinted toward the water. Leaping into the river, he grabbed the flailing woman, shouting for her to calm down and assuring her that he would save her. Moments later, the two of them sat on the grassy bank. Soaking wet and gasping for air, Akio asked the woman if she was all right, feeling a sense of relief that he had learned to swim since his childhood accident. The woman, breathing heavily, looked at him with wide eyes and asked if he was injured. As Akio caught his breath, he got a good look at the person he had rescued and froze. He stammered, questioning if she was an elf, as he stared at her long, pointed ears. The woman tilted her head, confused by his words. When she spoke, her words appeared to Akio as unintelligible symbols, confirming to him that she was speaking an otherworldly language and that an inhabitant of another world had come to theirs. It was a known fact in this world that people from other dimensions sometimes appeared on Earth. The first inhabitants from other worlds had arrived about 50 years ago, and since then, 21 appearances had been confirmed. These visitors, ranging from centaurs to mermaids, had captured the interest of people all over the globe. Facing the woman, Akio blushed deeply. He noted internally that while elves were very popular, and he had seen them on video, this was his first time seeing one up close.
The language barrier, however, was immediate and awkward. The elf woman began speaking rapidly in her native tongue, but Akio could only stare blankly, admitting he didn't know what to do because he couldn't understand her. He tried to ask if she understood him, gesturing with his hands, but she simply looked at him with wide, shocked eyes. She then looked around at the unfamiliar surroundings, the apartment buildings and electrical towers, with clear confusion. Trying to be helpful, Akio retrieved a towel from his bag and offered it to her, suggesting she dry off. The elf stared at the fluffy white object in his hands, puzzled. Akio mimed wiping his face to show her how to use it. Suddenly, the elf's demeanor shifted to one of intense determination. She reached out, but instead of taking the towel, she pressed her hand firmly against Akio's chest. A bright light erupted from her hand, shocking Akio. As the light faded, Akio looked down to find his clothes completely dry. He stared in disbelief, realizing he had just witnessed actual magic. The elf woman then looked at him with a gentle smile and apologized for interrupting him, explaining that she had to touch him to learn his language. Akio was stunned to hear her speaking perfect Japanese. She explained that while she thought the magic for learning would work immediately, she realized he hadn't understood her earlier. Akio, still processing the magical drying of his clothes, asked if she also used magic to dry him. She confirmed it with a smile. Grateful for the rescue, she formally introduced herself as Mel Vanderwood of the Elven tribe, telling him he could call her Mel. She thanked him for the cloth he had offered. Akio, flustered by her politeness and beauty, tried to hand her the towel again, but Mel suddenly moved with incredible speed. In a blur of motion, she drew a sword or tool from her hip and slashed through the air. Akio stood frozen, holding the towel, as Mel sheathed her weapon. He wondered if he had offended her. However, Mel simply apologized for being surprised, while Akio noticed a small sliced object on the ground nearby. She had instinctively attacked something that startled her. Akio quickly apologized for being rude, but Mel reassured him, blaming her own overreaction to the unfamiliar world. Akio realized she was heavily on guard, but understood that she was just nervous in a strange place. Trying to normalize the situation, Akio introduced himself as Urabe Akio. Mel noted that his naming convention, family name first, was the opposite of hers. She asked if he could call him Mr. Akio, and he agreed, relieved she didn't seem like a bad person. Mel then grew serious, observing that this was clearly not the world she knew. Mel observed the environment, noting the lack of mana in the air, which led her to believe this was a different world from her own. Akio confirmed that other worlds existed, and that other beings had arrived before her. Mel explained that mana was the source of power that created magic, visualized in Akio's mind as dragons and wizards. Akio then asked a difficult question. In the 50 years that visitors had been arriving, had anyone ever been able to return to their own world? Mel looked at him, awaiting the answer with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Akio had to deliver the harsh truth that in 50 years, no visitor had ever found a way back. He expected her to be devastated, but Mel took the news lightly, explaining that elves lived for over 1,000 years, so a 50-year detour was merely a long trip to her. However, she insisted that because Akio had saved her life, she was bound by honor to serve him forever, as failing to repay the debt would stain her family's name. She pressed closer to him, begging him to accept her service. Akio, unable to refuse such a strong request due to his nature, flusteredly agreed. Their conversation was interrupted as passers-by on the bridge above noticed Mel's elven features. A crowd quickly gathered, swarming them with excitement and trying to take photos of a real elf. Overwhelmed and sensing danger, Mel activated her magic again, summoning a powerful wind that pushed the crowd back. She grabbed Akio and launched them both into the sky, flying high above the residential rooftops to escape the commotion. As they soared through the air, Mel held Akio close, assuring him that he wouldn't fall as long as he held on to her. They landed on a high rooftop, overlooking the sprawling metropolis. Mel marveled at the density of the buildings and the prosperity of the city. Akio, still reeling from the flight, apologized for the aggressive crowd, but Mel dismissed it. understanding she was a rarity here. In a tender moment, Akio noted how warm her hand was, realizing that despite her alien origins, she was a living person just like him. Suddenly, Akio lost his footing near the edge of the roof. Mel caught him easily by the wrist, smiling and telling him to be careful. Akio realized then that his life was going to change forever. Following the incident, Akio took Mel to the Tenojin City Hall to meet with the government organization responsible for otherworldly beings. While waiting, Akio worried about the outcome, but Mel reassured him that she trusted him completely. They met with Ayumu Todo, the department manager, who returned Akio's lost briefcase. Todo confirmed that there was no way to return Mel to her world, and offered her government protection. Mel politely declined the protection, stating she had no choice but to live here. But she had a specific plan in mind. She announced her intention to live with Akio to repay her debt. When Todo and Akio both suggested that forever was too extreme and that they should forget the debt, Mel simply smiled radiantly and declared, "I refuse." She told Akio it was better to give up trying to change her mind. The department agreed to the arrangement, provided Mel passed a medical check and interview. They provided her with a guidebook for living on Earth, and gave Akio a business card for emergencies. Todo warned Akio that not all visitors were gentle, citing a past incident where troops were needed to stop a rampaging minotaur. Akio felt confident Mel would not be a problem. The visit concluded with Mel's public debut. She stepped out into a blinding storm of camera flashes at a press conference, introducing herself to the world. As reporters clamored for her attention, the department officials watched from the sidelines, already calculating how they could monetize Mel's presence as a character image and symbol for their organization. After the press conference, Akio received government funds to help support Mel, and they went shopping for necessities. At the supermarket, Mel was amazed by modern food packaging and technology. While shopping, Akio paused to help an elderly woman reach an item on a high shelf. Mel praised his kindness, but Akio humbly explained that he only helped people to avoid feeling bad himself. Mel smiled, affirming that he was indeed a good person. Their final stop was a clothing store, where the staff was thrilled to serve an elf. Mel asked Akio to help her choose clothes, initially picking out a revealing dress that made Akio panic. Eventually, she tried on a modest, professional outfit and asked Akio if she looked weird, marking the beginning of her new life in the human world. Inside the brightly lit clothing store, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Mel, the elf woman, stood before a three-way mirror, modeling a modest button-up shirt and long skirt. She looked toward Akio with a mixture of hope and uncertainty, seeking his approval. Akio, visibly struck by how elegant she looked, couldn't help but blush. He offered a sincere, heartfelt compliment, telling her that the outfit suited her perfectly. The shop assistant, standing nearby, with a pile of hangers, chimed in with agreement, reinforcing just how beautiful the ensemble looked on her. The effect of these words on Mel was instantaneous and overwhelming. The kanji for beautiful seemed to crash into her consciousness with physical force. Her heart gave a singular, massive throb, and her face turned completely red. Overcome by the intensity of the praise, her knees buckled. Akio and the shop assistant panicked as Mel slumped to the floor, her legs folded beneath her in a posture of defeat. Akio waved his hands frantically, fearing she had taken ill, while Mel clutched her chest, gasping for air. She looked up at him with teary eyes and asked, in all seriousness, if he had just utilized some sort of attack to shoot through her heart. She was physically reeling from the emotional impact. Akio, confused by her literal interpretation of a metaphorical feeling, tried to understand what was happening. The shop assistant, trying to salvage the situation, noted that Mel had chosen very modest clothes, perhaps contrasting with her dramatic reaction. After Mel had regained her composure enough to stand, Akio explained his reasoning for the outfit choice. He gestured to her, noting that because she had a very modest and polite way of speaking, he felt that more conservative, elegant clothing would match her personality best. This revelation, that Akio had been thinking deeply about her character and how to best present her to the world, sent Mel spiraling again. Her eyes literally swirled with dizziness, and she pressed her hands to her burning cheeks. Realizing he was conscious of her as a person, she felt a wave of affection so strong she nearly swooned again. Akio, oblivious to the extent of her internal romantic crisis, simply clarified that he was answering her question, while Mel stammered out a thank you for his concern. The pair eventually left the store, stepping out into the late afternoon sun. Akio carried the shopping bags in both hands, insisting that the load wasn't heavy when Mel expressed concern. As they walked through the quiet residential streets, the peaceful mood was shattered by the harsh vibration of a smartphone. Akio's pocket buzzed with an incoming call from work. A sense of dread washed over him as he stared at the screen, his mind flashing back to the nervousness of shopping with a woman for the first time, only to be interrupted by reality. He answered the phone with a sense of foreboding. It was his superior, asking him to come into work the following day. Akio tried to protest, reminding the caller that it was his scheduled day off. But the voice on the other end was insistent. If Akio didn't come in, an important delivery would be missed. The pressure was inescapable. Mel watched him with wide, curious eyes, fascinated by the small rectangular object he was speaking into. She asked if it was a form of communication magic. Akio, defeated, sighed deeply and capitulated, telling his boss he would be there. He hung up, his posture slumping in disappointment. He turned to Mel, explaining that he had agreed to go in, though his glum expression betrayed his true feelings. Mel, sensitive to his shifting mood, peered at him closely, asking if he had received bad news. Trying to shake off the gloom of the upcoming shift, Akio led them toward a large apartment complex. He pointed up toward the third floor, indicating where his home was located. As they approached the entrance, they were intercepted by a man and a young girl walking in the opposite direction. Akio brightened up, recognizing his neighbor, Urabe, and introduced Mel to Iyama Koichi and his daughter, Kaori. Iyama was friendly, immediately recognizing Mel from the news reports about the elf from another world. He commented on how she really was from a different reality. While the adults exchanged pleasantries, little Kaori stared up at Mel with wide, sparkling eyes. The little girl raised her hand high in an enthusiastic greeting. Mel, wanting to be polite and approachable, crouched down to Kaori's eye level, formally introducing herself and asking that they get along. Kaori didn't respond with words initially. Instead, she stared at Mel, thinking the elf woman was absolutely adorable. Suddenly, the little girl began to wiggle her body, waving her arms up and down in a rhythmic, erratic motion. Akio and Mel were both startled by the sudden outburst of movement. Iyama laughed nervously, explaining that this was a welcome dance Kaori performed whenever she found someone particularly cute or charming. Mel, taking the child's actions with the utmost seriousness, decided that a formal greeting required a formal response. To Akio's utter shock, Mel began to mimic the child's movements. She waved her arms and wiggled her hips in a stiff but earnest attempt to replicate the welcome dance. Akio stared at the scene, the mystical elf woman and the neighbor's child gyrating at each other on the sidewalk, and felt his own face heat up. Despite the absurdity, his internal monologue screamed, but the sight was incredibly cute. The dance session continued for a moment, with Kaori declaring she couldn't stop, and Iyama noting Mel's friendly nature. Akio, trying to wrap up the interaction, joked that Kaori would be in Mel's care when she grew up. Kaori, emboldened by the connection, suddenly shouted a proposal, demanding that Mel become her bride. Without skipping a beat or understanding the nuance of human marriage, Mel smiled warmly and accepted the proposal, promising to play with Kaori whenever she had time. Akio stared in disbelief, asking if she realized she had just sworn a binding oath. Kaori, oblivious to the complexity, pumped her fist in the air, celebrating her victory in securing a bride. Finally, Akio and Mel made it up to the third floor and entered his apartment. Akio welcomed her in, and Mel looked around, acknowledging that her new life was beginning right there. As Akio began unpacking the groceries and placing items in the refrigerator, he complimented Mel on her composure. He noted that despite being suddenly transported to another world, she remained calm and friendly, showing no fear of anyone. Mel stood by the entrance, looking at him with soft eyes. She admitted that she wasn't afraid because Akio himself was so friendly. Akio, pausing with a carton in his hand, laughed self-deprecatingly. He thought to himself that he wasn't confident he could maintain such composure if their roles were reversed. If he were in her shoes, he felt he would be incredibly upset and likely taken advantage of. But for now, in the safety of his apartment, the two settled into a quiet, domestic rhythm. The domestic tranquility of unpacking groceries was suddenly interrupted by a clumsy mishap in the kitchen. As Akio attempted to stow away a large box containing an iron pot, he lost his footing. The box tumbled from above, and Akio stumbled forward in a panic, unable to regain his balance. Gravity took hold, and he pitched directly into Mel, his face planting squarely into her chest with a soft thud. Whether from the shock of the fall or the overwhelming proximity, Akio's eyes swirled in dizziness, and he promptly fainted, collapsing against her. Mel caught him frantically, shouting his name to see if he was all right, but he remained unresponsive in her arms. Realizing he had completely lost consciousness, she settled onto the floor, resting his head gently on her lap. She waved her hand over his face, generating a soothing wind to help cool him down, observing that he had simply fainted from the excitement. Eventually, she managed to get him into bed, tucking him in under the covers where he slept with a peaceful, childlike expression on his face. With Akio resting soundly, Mel quietly walked to the sliding glass doors and stepped out onto the apartment's balcony. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, she gazed out at the sprawling, modern cityscape. The wind blew through her hair, carrying the scent of a place that was entirely new to her. She looked over the vast number of buildings, reflecting that this was an unfamiliar city filled with strangers. Standing in the twilight, she felt the foreign wind against her skin and watched a sunset she did not recognize, fully accepting in that quiet moment that she was truly living in a different world. The next morning, the sun rose brightly over the apartment complex. Akio awoke in his bed, blinking groggily as consciousness returned. For a moment, his mind was blank, but then the memories of the previous day, Mel-san, came rushing back, causing him to throw off his blankets in a sudden panic. He sat on the edge of his bed, looking around his empty room, trying to piece together the fragmented events. He remembered fainting and being carried, but the absurdity of it all made him pause. Holding his head in his hands, he began to rationalize. Living with an elven woman was simply impossible. It had to be a dream. Yeah, that was a dream, dreaming genius, he told himself, a wave of relief washing over him. He smiled, concluding that he had just come home tired and slept through the night, dreaming up a nice fantasy. His relief was shattered an instant later when an arrow whistled past his face. Fwhip! And embedded itself into the wall with a sharp tap. Akio froze, his eyes widening in shock. He looked up to see Mel standing in his doorway, holding a bow, and casually greeting him with a, "Good morning, Akio-san." Before he could process her presence, Mel drew her bow again, aiming intently at something near him. "Get down, Akio-san. I'll shoot it now," she warned. A pigeon flapped frantically around Akio, using him as a human shield against the elven archer. Mel lowered her bow in frustration as the bird escaped out the window, lamenting that the bird she had hoped to catch for breakfast had gotten away. Akio, still reeling, reached out and touched Mel's hand, feeling the warmth of her skin. "It was not a dream," he murmured, accepting reality. Mel smiled gently, touching her own cheek and confirming, "Look, I am right here." The tension broke as a delicious aroma drifted through the air. Akio's stomach rumbled as he realized something smelled wonderful. Mel beamed, explaining that she was in the middle of making breakfast. She proudly described how she had used the user manuals to master the apartment's magic items, comparing the gas stove to a box of fire and the sink to a spring water bucket. She had found ingredients like eggs and bread and hoped her cooking would suit his taste. They sat down at the small table, where Mel presented a meal of toast topped with a perfectly cooked egg, accompanied by salad and soup. She watched him nervously as he took his first bite. Akio chewed thoughtfully, then froze. "It's so delicious," he exclaimed, his face lighting up. Mel breathed a sigh of relief. As Akio ate, he was deeply moved by the warmth and flavor of a homemade meal, realizing how long it had been since he had eaten anything other than convenience store bento or instant noodles. Mel watched him eat with a contented smile, remarking that she was just happy to share a meal with someone after so long. Later, as they stood side by side at the sink washing dishes, the domestic routine settling in, Akio turned to her with a question that had been lingering in his mind. "When you were drowning in the river," he asked, "why didn't you use your magic?" Mel explained to Akio that magic was not a simple force to wield. It required following strict procedures and rules, and if those weren't adhered to, it wouldn't work. She confessed with a flushed face that during the incident in the river, she had been unable to chant her spells properly due to the chaos. She further elaborated that there was a special secret magic that carried an even greater cost. When Akio asked if it consumed mana, she confirmed that was basically the case. Shifting the subject, Mel asked Akio if he would be willing to show her around the city later, to which he agreed, though he was curious about the cost she had mentioned earlier. Meanwhile, out on the sunny streets of the town, two young women were walking together, discussing the rumors of the elf who had reportedly taken up residence nearby. One girl expressed excitement at the possibility of meeting her, while the other warned that they shouldn't make a fuss, even if they did encounter her. As fate would have it, they turned a corner and immediately ran into Akio and Mel. The girls gasped in unison, stunned to see the rumor was reality, with one exclaiming that the elf was actually there. Recovering from their shock, the dark-haired girl politely greeted Mel, who returned the greeting with a smile. Akio stood by, noting internally that Mel was already becoming something of a celebrity. The girl then turned her attention to Akio, bluntly asking if the two of them were perhaps on a date. Akio quickly waved his hands in denial, explaining that he was simply showing Mel around the city. However, Mel playfully interjected, claiming with a giggle that it was, in fact, a date. Akio looked at her in shock, while the girls stared at the pair, trying to decipher the true nature of their relationship. As they parted ways, Mel apologized for teasing him, while Akio rubbed the back of his head, embarrassed. The two girls walked away, pumping their fists and cheering Akio on, telling him to do his best, which only added to his awkwardness. Mel then asked Akio what he did for a living. Akio hesitated, realizing he had work that afternoon, and struggled to find a way to explain the concept of a programmer to someone from a fantasy world so that she could understand. He decided to use a metaphor she would grasp. He explained that his job was technical and involved setting up a device with a specific set of procedures so that anyone could use it. He drew a parallel to the magic mechanisms she had described earlier. Mel's eyes lit up with understanding, noting that it sounded similar to the work of someone who crafted magic items. As they continued their walk, Mel noticed a bed of flowers and asked for their name. Akio identified them as Cosmos. Mel gazed at the flowers with a melancholic expression, remarking that they looked very similar to the flowers she used to pick with her younger brother and sister back home. Seeing her sadness, Akio realized her family must be worried about her. Mel agreed, imagining her siblings crying and refusing to eat because of her disappearance. However, she found comfort in the thought of her mother, a brilliant magician whom she believed would understand the situation and know she was safe. She reassured Akio that it would be okay. Mel then explained that naturally, her kind was very perceptive and close to people's feelings, which relieved Akio, who thought of her as very kind. Suddenly, Mel leaned in uncomfortably close to Akio's face, causing him to panic at the proximity. After observing him for a moment, she diagnosed his character. He was someone easily influenced by other people. She explained that he was easily affected by the anger and suffering of those around him, which caused him to become tired and nervous. She also noted that he found it very hard to say no when asked for a favor, leading others to take advantage of him. Akio was struck by the accuracy of her words. He recalled moments at work where he was called naive and told he lacked a strong sense of self because he was pulled around by others' feelings. He admitted to Mel that he had been embarrassed to hear that about himself, but he had agreed with it. He confessed that because of this trait, he had wanted to change and become more insensitive to make his life easier. Mel looked at him with gentle eyes and told him to please treasure that feeling in his heart instead of discarding it. She expressed her hope that he would accept himself for who he was. Akio, moved to tears by her acceptance, stared at her in awe. Despite having only met her the day before, he realized he wanted to know much more about her. Mel continued, explaining that if they could share their pain and joy together, a new bond would be formed. She told him directly that he possessed the ability to weave bonds with others. Akio stood stunned, realizing that up until that moment, his interactions with people had been viewed through a completely different lens. Sitting on the park bench, Akio looked at Mel and felt a surge of hope. He told her that he would be delighted if she would form a bond with him as well. Mel, however, revealed a vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. she admitted that she wasn't actually strong enough to accept her current situation alone, and that the person supporting her the most right now was him. Suddenly, Mel leaned in extremely close, her face inches from his, and stated clearly that it was him, Akio-san. Akio, flustered by the proximity, stammered in confusion. Mel then referenced the first magic she had learned, prompting Akio to recall their earlier conversation about a magical cost beyond just mana. Mel confirmed that she had used a secret spell to connect with him. She then revealed the true nature of that cost. The user of the magic inevitably falls in love with the person they connect with. Akio was shocked to learn this was a side effect of connecting souls. Mel, holding her flushed cheeks and looking visibly love-struck, rationalized internally that the side effect wasn't too bad, since Akio seemed like a nice guy, and she had needed the magic to gain information about this dangerous world quickly. The magic's effect appeared to intensify rapidly. Mel's eyes began to swirl with an obsessive pattern as she declared that, due to this overwhelming feeling, she had decided to live in this world. She breathed heavily, looking intoxicated by the emotion, and told a terrified Akio that it didn't matter what caused the love, only that the feeling itself was wonderful. Mel continued her advance, leaning into Akio and asking if her feelings presented a problem or an inconvenience. When Akio denied this, she moved even closer, her eyes fixed on him, claiming she was sure she came to this world just to meet him. Akio panicked internally, realizing that magic was no joke, and fearing that their relationship was about to change instantly if she took another step. Desperate to de-escalate the situation, Akio threw his hands up and shouted for them to calm down. He reasoned with Mel, suggesting that she take time to sort out his feelings, as she had just been through a series of major life changes. Mel's intense expression faded, and she agreed with his logic. Akio, sweating from the encounter, suggested they go home and have some tea, telling himself that taking things slow with such matters was important for the future. The story continues with a moment of domestic intimacy during a meal. Mel, holding a piece of food on a fork, affectionately urged Akio to open his mouth and let her feed him. Although Akio initially protested, insisting he could eat on his own, Mel persisted, telling him not to be shy. As Akio capitulated and took the bite, he found himself thinking that life with her was so sweet that even bitter melon tasted good, though the closeness clearly flustered him. Later, while they were in the kitchen together, Akio asked for clarification on a cooking tool. Mel stepped in close behind him, placing her hands over his to demonstrate how to use the pepper mill. The physical proximity overwhelmed Akio, and Mel, realizing how near she was to his face, teased him about his handsome face before backing away with a playful apology. The tension lingered as they finished their meal, with Mel cheerfully offering to clear the table and make some tea. Say one moment to tick carefully. While Akio stormed up the sink washing dishes, Mel approached him again, leaning in to whisper that his shoulders were very broad, frantically scrubbing the dishes while splashing water on his face to cool down. He tried to rationalize the situation by telling himself repeatedly that Mel's affection was merely a side effect of the magic she had used and that she wasn't genuinely interested in him. Standing in the kitchen, while Mel hung laundry nearby, Akio spiraled into self-deprecation. He warned Mel not to think of him as attractive, labeling himself a loser whose age was equal to the number of years he had been single. He lamented internally that the real Mel before the magic spell would not be happy with this situation. Mel, seemingly unfazed, continued her chores. The conversation then turned to Akio's romantic history. Mel asked him directly how many people he had dated, and when Akio admitted the number was 0, she looked visibly pleased. Akio then shifted the topic to a serious concern he had been harboring. He asked if the side effects of the learning magic, her artificial affection for him, were supposed to go away someday. Mel's expression became serious, as she admitted she honestly wasn't sure if the effects would fade. She explained that learning magic was rarely utilized specifically because of this side effect of falling in love, so there was very little information known about the lives of those who had used it. She added that she couldn't even gauge the outcome through her intuition. Akio remarked that this uncertainty naturally bothered him. Mel leaned in close again, teasingly asking if his concern meant he cared about her. Akio tried to maintain that he wanted to prioritize her true feelings. However, Mel's eyes began to swirl with an intense, obsessive pattern as she declared that she didn't care what her true feelings were anymore, seemingly throwing away her past identity for the sake of her current emotions. The heavy moment was interrupted when Akio realized they were due for an interview and physical checkup, and needed to get ready immediately. Akio rushed to get dressed, noting that he had also been invited to the appointment. They arrived at a large, official-looking building, with Akio checking his phone to confirm they were at the right place, while Mel stood beside him. Outside the secure building, they were greeted by Mr. Toto and a woman named Mikako Kano. Mr. Toto thanked them for coming all that way. When asked how she liked life in Japan, Mel replied that it was comfortable and she was very satisfied. Akio debated internally whether he should inform these officials about the side effects of Mel's magic, hesitating when Toto asked if there was anything particular they needed to discuss. The woman, Mikako Kono, introduced herself formally, stating she would be in charge of Mel from now on and that she was happy to meet them. She led them to the medical office to begin a physical examination. Mikako proceeded to check Mel's pulse, blood pressure, and pupils, declaring that everything looked good, while Akio observed the process. The examination progressed to blood work, with Mikako asking permission to collect a small sample using a syringe. Mel, unfamiliar with modern medical practices, looked at the needle with suspicion and asked if the blood was required to create a curse. Mikako quickly clarified that the sample was solely for obtaining a detailed picture of her health. Reassured, Mel agreed to the procedure, though Mikako noted that the needle would sting slightly. After the blood was drawn, Mikako applied a small bandage to the injection site and instructed Mel not to touch the area for a while. However, Mel immediately placed her hand over the spot and cast Healing Wind. A small swirl of magical energy surrounded her arm, and when she removed her hand, the puncture wound had completely vanished, leaving Mikako stunned and wide-eyed at the casual display of immediate recovery. Mikako, trying to process what she just saw, asked if Mel had been a priestess, assuming that healing abilities were tied to divinity. Mel corrected her, explaining that her power was wind magic, which was fundamentally different from the healing magic used by priests that relied on divine power. This distinction only fueled Mikako's excitement, and she eagerly begged Mel to tell them more about magic. Standing to the side, Akio reflected on the tremendous impact magic was already having on the world. The global context of this impact was significant. In Italy, a priestess had appeared who could heal illnesses and injuries with healing magic. In India, a druid was using natural magic to drastically improve crop production. And in Germany, an alchemist was making strides in energy development. Magic was rapidly becoming a global resource. Back in the office, Mikako spoke with fervor, explaining that magic had great potential, and that every country was eager to recruit people from other worlds who could wield it. She admitted that Japan, too, wanted to incorporate magic. Unable to contain her curiosity, Mikako touched Mel's face and asked if she wouldn't mind showing them some magic right then and there. Mel agreed, and Mikako immediately called her boss to announce they were moving to Hall 2 for a demonstration. They relocated to a massive testing facility filled with cameras, recording equipment, and scientists. Mel stood in the center of the room, ready to demonstrate her abilities to the captivated audience. She began by showcasing offensive magic, casting a blade of wind that sliced clean through a thick concrete pillar. She then demonstrated supplemental magic, levitating and flying through the air, before finishing with natural magic, where she manipulated nature to make a plant grow rapidly from a pot. The demonstration left the research team in awe. Mr. Todo, impressed by her talent, formally asked Mel if she would like to be part of their organization. He explained that they needed her as a countermeasure against potential threats from other worlds, valuing her magical powers, knowledge, and experience. Mel accepted the offer without hesitation. Mr. Todo assured her that she would be paid well, even starting at an entry-level position. However, Mel turned to Akio, clinging to his arm, and declared that while she accepted the job, she served Akio and must fulfill her responsibilities to him first. Akio looked flustered by her declaration. Mikako, observing the interaction, winked at Akio and teased him, remarking that he sure was loved. Later, while Mel was busy demonstrating her physical strength by bending a steel bar for a scientist, Akio spoke privately with Mikako. He asked if there were any magicians from other countries who might be able to help, specifically fishing for a solution to the love spell side effect. Mikako admitted she would ask around, but noted she didn't know anyone skilled in that specific area. Mikako then turned the conversation back to Mel, asking Akio if there was really anything wrong with being loved by such a beautiful woman, or if perhaps he already had a girlfriend. Akio, looking at Mel with a conflicted expression and a blush on his cheeks, denied having a girlfriend, but admitted he felt guilty. He confessed to Mikako that he didn't think this artificial affection was what true love was supposed to be. In this passage, Mikako teased him, saying they had a nice vibe, but Akio remained unsure. Mel approached Mikako and whispered that she thought it was best to be a little aggressive with a guy like Akio. Mikako, playing along, told Akio that if he started believing the love was real, he could make it real. Suddenly, Mel grabbed Akio in a powerful hug, utilizing a strength enhancement contact technique. As Akio panicked about his sanity and celibacy, Mikako laughed, claiming she was just joking, while Mel held him tight. The story takes a turn toward the realities of Akio's working life, beginning in his office. Akio stood nervously before his boss, who handed him a thick document titled Book of Fundamental Designs for a client named Fudo Kokoda Co. Limited. The boss noted that the delivery date for the project was very short, causing Akio to stammer that it might be too much for him to handle. However, the boss cut off his protest by declaring that he had a lot of faith in Akio, effectively guilt-tripping him by stating it was his responsibility to take whatever steps were necessary to ensure it was done on time. Akio was left staring blankly, filled with a heavy sense of dread as he accepted the impossible task. A pause here. The consequences of this new workload immediately impacted his home life. 3 days later, Akio finally managed to return to his apartment, but a glance at his watch revealed that the date had already changed. It was well past midnight. He entered the hallway, exhausted, announcing his return. Mel appeared immediately to welcome him home, dressed in a sheer nightgown. Akio, surprised and concerned, asked if she had been waiting for him all this time, reminding her that he had told her over the phone to go to sleep without him. Mel simply told him to pay it no mind, prioritizing his presence over her sleep. The toll of the overtime was evident as Akio sat down to a late dinner. He calculated mentally that he had only managed to secure about 4 hours of sleep before he had to return to work. As he finished eating and prepared to stand up to wash his dishes, Mel intervened. She placed her hands on his shoulders, insisting that she would handle the cleaning later, and urged him to take it easy. She began to massage his stiff shoulders, noting how much he had been doing lately, while Akio flushed and accepted her care. Later, Akio collapsed into bed, his body heavy with fatigue. He stared up at the ceiling, reflecting on the fact that he hadn't even eaten dinner until he got home, yet Mel had waited to reheat the food for him. He felt a deep pang of guilt, realizing that recently Mel had even taken over his chores. He thought to himself that he was the one who was supposed to be supporting her in this new world, and yet he found himself unable to do anything but rely on her. Sensing his distress and physical exhaustion, Mel leaned over him, her expression full of worry. She told him frankly that she was just worried about him. She explained that every now and then she would touch him to check on his condition, and she could feel that his life force was weakened from fatigue. She warned him that at this rate, the worst-case scenario was that he might simply not wake up at some point. With serious eyes, she proposed a drastic solution. She thought he should quit his job. Akio was stunned by the suggestion and immediately sat up to protest. He argued that if he quit his job now, it would be terrible for his company. He tried to rationalize his suffering, explaining that everyone else worked under the same conditions. Mel looked at him with sadness, countering that he worried far too much for the people around him. She observed that he put everyone else's needs above his own to such an extent that he couldn't even be kind to himself or give himself any grace. Desperation took hold of Mel. She moved over him, pinning him to the floor to stop him from moving. She explained that if he didn't stop properly and rest, even her healing magic wouldn't be good enough to save him. Tears formed in her eyes as she told him she would regret it for the rest of her life if she lost him. She begged him, pleading that if there was anything she could do to make things better, she would do it. She confessed that she must be in a terrible state to say such things in desperation. The depth of Mel's commitment to him was further illustrated during another moment of high tension. Akio, trying to power through his exhaustion, reached for a caffeine monster energy drink, claiming he just needed it to get through the moment. Mel physically tackled him to the ground with a loud bam, preventing him from drinking it. Pinned beneath her, Akio tried to laugh it off, saying he had always felt this tired. Mel, hovering over him with intense emotion, shouted that she had already decided to serve him for the rest of her life. She expressed her terrified conflict. She was committed to serving him, yet she was constantly worried she would lose him in the middle of that service due to his recklessness. The next morning, the sun streamed through the window, signaling a new day. Akio woke up in a panic, realizing he had overslept. Disoriented, he scrambled out of bed, apologizing and shouting that he would eat his dinner right now. Mel stood calmly by the glass door, correcting him that it was already time for breakfast. When Akio pointed out that she hadn't woken him, she explained that she had tried her best, but he hadn't responded until just now. She noted sadly that he was so tired he couldn't even be woken up, apologizing for her inability to rouse him. As Mel poured tea in the kitchen, Akio watched her back. He apologized for coming home late again. He thought about her recent behavior, how she had been touchy and anxious. He realized that perhaps she was feeling this anxiety because she spent so much time by herself in the apartment. Determined to help her as she helped him, Akio asked how she felt about making a new friend. He suggested she could talk to this new person about all sorts of things, asking if the idea made her anxious. Mel admitted yes to the anxiety. However, Akio reassured her, saying that since it was her, he was sure she would get along easily with everyone. He proposed they try talking to Kano-san about it next time, and Mel, though hesitant, seemed to consider the idea.